Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for Nonprofit HR's virtual learning education event. Today's session is entitled 3 Things Your Organization's HR Assessment Should Reveal. My name is Atokatha Ashman Brew, Managing Director for Marketing and Strategic Communication with Nonprofit HR. I will be your conversation moderator for today. We've got lots of great content to cover on this very important topic. Just a brief note about Nonprofit HR. Since 2000, Nonprofit HR remains the country's leading and oldest firm focused exclusively on the talent management needs of the social impact sector, including nonprofits, associations, social enterprises, and other mission-driven organizations. We focus our consulting efforts on the following practice areas: strategy and advisory, HR outsourcing, total rewards, equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice, and search. And now, a little about our presenters. Shelby Webster is a senior consultant with our strategy and advisory practice. She provides strategic guidance, insight, and direction on a variety of complex client engagements and talent management projects in areas such as workforce planning, HR assessments and audits, organizational culture assessments, employee engagement, change management, and performance management. She also leads learning and development projects by conducting these assessments, developing content design, delivering training sessions, and measuring effectiveness. She provides strategic thought partnership to clients and internal team members and represents Nonprofit HR by presenting and writing in her areas of expertise. Suanna Watson is a consultant with our strategy and advisory practice. Suanna has progressive HR experience, including employee relations, performance management, onboarding and orientation, and more. She is most passionate about providing support to clients in the areas of employee relations, compliance, and process improvement. Later, we will be joined by Dr. Tracy Weeks, Managing Director for Strategy and Advisory. Tracy will join us for our Q&A session. And now, Shelby and Suanna, I'd like to turn it over to you both to get us started with our main presentation of the day.
Thank you so much, Atokatha, for that warm introduction. Good afternoon. I am Shelby Webster, Senior Consultant with the Strategy and Advisory Practice Area with Nonprofit HR. I have 25 years of experience under my belt, operating really as a generalist with that broad generalist background. I have for-profit and also nonprofit experience under my belt, and I'm super excited to have this opportunity to speak with you all today regarding HR assessments.
Great. And my name is Suanna Watson. I am a consultant with Nonprofit HR, as Atokatha mentioned. I have almost 10 years of experience in HR as mainly a generalist, and I have been supporting nonprofit organizations over the past 4 years and looking forward to getting into HR assessments.
Okay, so we have an exciting agenda prepared for our participants on the call today. We're going to start out by talking about why conduct an HR assessment. We're going to couple that with when to conduct an HR assessment. We're also going to spend some time this afternoon talking about what does the assessment process look like, as well as what does the assessment process entail. All of you came today because you really want to know what does an HR assessment reveal. So we're also going to spend time this afternoon diving into some of the areas that your HR assessment will reveal. And then we're going to talk about how do you leverage those HR assessment results to drive improvement, change within your organization, and also as it relates to the HR function as a whole. However, before we actually jump into the presentation, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with our participants this afternoon, just taking you through a quick true or false participant poll. One of the things that I want to ask that you do, participants, is hold off on recording your responses in the questions pane area until after I read the question, and then let's give everyone just a few seconds to respond. And once I see what the majority of the responses are, I'll then respond and let everyone know what the correct answer to the question. So the first question, first true and false question is as follows: an HR audit and an HR assessment are the same, true or false? So again, if you can capture your responses in the question pane starting now. Are we seeing any responses come through?
There are several, and many are coming in through as false.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, we've got one just came through as true, but for the most part, falses are in the majority.
All right. Thank you. So the correct answer to question number 1 is false. And human resources audit is really more of an objective assessment or examination of a company's HR practices, policies, and procedures. It's really in place to allow the organization the opportunity to identify issues with its HR department, as well as the opportunity to implement improvements. HR audits can help organizations determine what policies are working well as look into opportunities to help reduce operational costs. HR audits are also useful to ensure compliance with HR rules as well as employment law and regulations. Some audits also allow companies to assess the efficacy or the efficiency of their HR practices by comparing them to practices of other organizations. Regular HR audits are useful in helping your companies determine really to adapt to changing employment law as well as organizational practices. There are several types of audits. I'm not going to go into those today because that's not the purpose of our call, but just wanted to highlight that there are several types that exist. While finding when you look at an HR assessment, an HR assessment is more of a comprehensive review of the entire HR function, areas such as talent acquisition, learning and development, HRIS, total rewards, which is compensation and benefits, policies and procedures, compliance and record keeping, as well as culture and engagement. So again, an HR assessment takes that deep dive look at all of the HR service offerings to include policies, practices, procedures, and also compliance as well. Okay, let's move on to the second question. And again, another true and false. True or false? HR assessments provide valuable strategic and operational insights. So let's give you a couple seconds to capture your responses. And Atokatha, if you can help me again to tell me what the majority of the responses are, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, Shelby, still waiting, not coming in just yet.
Okay.
But someone did follow up regarding the last question, and they said that it depends on who is the messenger and what the speaker is intending to convey. So they had that as a follow-up to your response.
Okay.
Most responses coming in now for this question are true, Shelby.
Okay, excellent. And you are all correct for those who answered true. An HR assessment is a vehicle that really provides the organization with insights regarding the organization's strategic and operational capacity and capabilities. It also offers insights really around the perspective of the degree of alignment or misalignment between HR and organizational priorities. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier, the effectiveness of HR program offerings. So for all of you who answered true, you are correct. So question number 3, true or false? HR assessments are only conducted when issues occur within the organization.
I'm just waiting for those questions to start coming in, or those responses.
Thank you, Atokatha.
Yeah, responses are coming in as false. Nope,
All right.
no, and false.
Okay, all right. The correct answer to question 3 is false. While an HR assessment can occur as a result of an issue, the truth is that HR assessments are often conducted when an organization is experiencing such things as growth or leadership at the top of the organization. To include HR needs insight into the readiness of the HR function to accommodate an organizational shift, organizational growth, or if there's a need to understand what is the degree that our HR function operates strategically versus tactically, or, a need to garner insight on the effectiveness of the suite of HR offerings ranging from, how effective are our talent acquisition processes, how effective are our performance enablement and L&D, just to name a few. So delving in to understand these offerings will help the organization with its ability to attract, recruit, and retain talent. Okay, so let's move on to question number 4. Again, another true or false. HR assessments can help organizations measure the effectiveness of their employee training and development programs. True or false?
Responses haven't started coming in just yet.
Okay, we'll give it another second. And this one's an easy one.
Yeah, they're coming in as true.
All right. If you responded with true, you are correct. One of the areas that an HR assessment centers on is really the effectiveness of an organization's learning and development programs. The assessment evaluates such things as overall effectiveness of the programs, whether an enterprise-wide learning assessment needs to occur, does the organization have learning and development strategy in place at the onset, and is the strategy aligned with the overall organization's objectives? So again, if you responded true to number 4, you are correct. Our 5th and final true or false question for today is, HR assessments focus primarily on compliance or regulatory concerns. True or false? Are we seeing responses yet, Atakatha? This one's a little tricky.
Yeah, not yet. It's well, the first ones are coming in as false.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the answer to that question, it is false. So while an HR assessment can identify potential compliance or regulatory concerns, what we really want our audience to understand is that this is really not the sole focus of the assessment. There are many different approaches to take when conducting an HR assessment. However, from the standpoint of nonprofit HR, when we take a look at an organization's HR function, we propose to do a deep dive look at the effectiveness of the organization from the stance of its HR systems, its processes, talent acquisition, again, performance, learning and development, total rewards, culture and development, compliance and record keeping, and finally, policies and procedures. Compliance is an area of the assessment that centers on the stance of, is HR compliant with such things as record retention, employment law posters, does the function conduct routine audits, does the function conduct compliance trainings, etc. So again, for those of you all who responded false, you are correct with number 5. So thanks for your participation and engagement. And throughout the remainder of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about each of these areas in further. So let's now transition and talk about, why would an organization or why would the HR function consider conducting an HR assessment? I think it's important for us to take a moment to acknowledge that some organizations or participants that are on the phone call today might be interested in conducting their own assessments. Others might be at a place where you're looking to consider a third party to help. Either way is fine. Again, we're just one model, one approach that we're highlighting and sharing today. And we wanted to make sure we did, speak to that. But in terms of why conduct an assessment, I think it's important to really highlight that conducting an assessment can really provide the organization with invaluable data around several core areas that are highlighted on the screen. So let's take a moment to talk about just a few. The first one is compliance. And I want to add with that, compliance with evolving laws. Participants, did you know that on average, the Department of Labor manages or administers over 180 plus federal employment laws that governs all aspects of the working relationships? Also, as we all know now, most states now have, or in some cases, in states such as California, New York, or Massachusetts, have many employment laws that govern the working relationship. In 2023 alone, there have been several states that have adopted new measures governing such things as minimum wage, pay transparency, legalized drugs, and criminal justice reform. So where compliance is concerned, compliance with existing and also evolving laws is important for the organization to stay on top of, because again, the idea is for the organization to mitigate or minimize its risk. Compliance can also occur relative to such things as hiring, your terminations, employee classifications or misclassifications, workplace safeties, or violations around leave of absence. So an HR assessment is a good vehicle really to help the organization understand its level of compliance as well as its level of risk with existing and or evolving employment law. The second piece that I'd like to talk about is really equity and consistency as it relates to policies and procedures. In addition to complying with government mandated regulations, I think it's important or essential for organizations to really uphold equitable and uniform HR policies and procedures. Our workforces and our workspaces are much more diverse than they've ever been before. So it's important that policies and procedures are really centered around providing an environment that is inclusive, fair, and promotes consistency. So the promotion of equity and consistency with regards to your policies and procedures has the ability to enhance in the employee experience, employee morale, performance, and overall job satisfaction. Conversely, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if your policies are not viewed as being equitable and consistent, they may lead employees or team members to perceive the organization as being biased and or promoting favoritism, which would be a challenge. The third area that really necessitates the need to conduct an HR assessment is really around evaluating the quality of HR programs. Have you ever wondered, participants, business leaders, professionals, how effective are our programs? Do our programs need to evolve, or do these programs need to be replaced? Well, the quality of HR programs plays a pivotal role in organizational success from the standpoint of its ability to attract, retain, recruit, and also to maintain your talent that is diverse. So an inventory of programs should encompass what we would consider various facets of understanding such things as, are your programs sufficient around talent acquisition? Do they promote candidate engagement? And do these programs help the organization attract the needed talent? When looking at performance enablement, such things as, does the organization's strategy promote a model of continuous coaching and feedback, or is the model cumbersome for leaders and employees? These are things an HR assessment can help to uncover and explore. Where employee learning and development and training are concerned, questions such as, do our training programs focus on developing the core competencies? Are our competencies aligned with the overarching organizational goals? These are all questions that conducting an inventory of your programs can help to uncover. And then relative to culture engagement, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion, do your DEI efforts touch on all the dimensions of diversity? Do the efforts really help to cultivate an environment in which employees can bring their authentic selves to the workspace? Finally, I think it's important to assess the caliber of your existing programs and practices, because it's imperative due to the ability that each of these areas has to influence employee satisfaction, employee engagement, and retention. The fourth area that I'd like to talk briefly about is HR skills or HR function capacity and capability. This is another area in which your HR assessment really has the power to lift up and to really show, what are the competencies, what are the capabilities of the team? Or on the converse, are there areas where there's deficiencies relative to the HR team's skill or competencies? This really positions the HR function to determine what additional trainings might be needed, what types of staffing adjustments might be needed. And again, it gives you an opportunity to put development planning in place as well. The fifth area in terms of why should you conduct an assessment deals with just really that a strategic approach. As we've already shared, an HR assessment is but just one tool or vehicle that's designed to help the organization understand its strategic capabilities, especially related to human resources. The assessment can again gauge the effectiveness, or on the converse, identify opportunities related to the core areas of talent acquisition, L&D, culture, and engagement. In theory, the HR strategy is really a roadmap for helping the HR function and the organization solve its biggest challenges with a people-centric solution. The last area that I'd like to talk about is just alignment with organizational mission. This is one of the most important markers for the success of HR. And again, being aligned with the organization's mission is critical to the success. So for example, when you say, Shelby, being aligned, what do you mean? So if your organization is growth mode and the organization's HR function is focused on everything but ensuring the organization has a viable talent strategy in place to attract and recruit and retain talent, then this is a classic example of how a misalignment can occur. The organization's success hinges on the HR's function's ability to be aligned with all organizational aims, priorities, and objectives. Next slide, please, Atokatha. I wanted to take just a few moments and talk about our 2023 Talent Management Priorities Survey results. Each year, Nonprofit HR conducts this survey, and the purpose of this survey is really to garner feedback and insight from within the nonprofit sector in terms of what are HR leaders, organizational leaders prioritizing relative to all the critical areas of the talent management life cycle. So relative to the report this year, there were three themes that I really wanted to highlight for 2023. The first is that 93% of organizations are prioritizing culture and engagement in 2023. The second slide in the middle shows that 66% of organizations are prioritizing total rewards, which is compensation and benefits. Thirdly, 79% of organizations are prioritizing learning and development. This report of the survey really highlights key insights relative, again, to not only what's happening in the sector, but again, what's top of mind for leaders. It's also important, I think, to note that these findings support the fact that many organizations are focused on the employee experience and outcomes relative to such things as employee morale, productivity, and retention, all of which affect organizational outcomes. I also want to take a moment just to share some other findings. I looked at Gallup's 2023 Workplace Survey Report and found that relative to engagement, only about 32% of full and part-time employees were actively engaged in 2022. And while that number is slightly up above the prior years, it just shows that there still needs to be a robust focus on HR and organizations prioritizing, really facilitating cultures and environments that are engaged. And again, your HR assessment is but just one vehicle that can aid in helping the organization prioritize in that area. Finally, the Harvard Business Review found that there are 9 trends in 2023 and beyond that are going to continue to impact HR and hiring. And these are such trends as quiet hiring, which is now where organizations are placing more of a focus on internal talent mobility and upskilling. Also, organizations are now, because of the shortage of talent, pursuing non-traditional talent to build or fill talent pipelines. And then organizations are all implementing protocols to address pandemic trauma. And then organizations are also continuing to push DEI and DEI-related initiatives and programs, and also working to address AI and some of the challenges that brings. So all of this data, coupled with what we've shared from our 2023 Talent Management Priorities Survey, really speaks to the importance of the need for an organization or individuals within an organization to consider conducting an HR assessment and to leverage those results, again, to prioritize culture, engagement, total rewards, and learning and development. So before turning the presentation over to my colleague Swana, the last thing I'd like to cover in this section with the participants today is, when should an organization or when should HR consider conducting an HR assessment? So next slide, Tokatha. So in terms of when should an organization or when should HR conduct an assessment, oftentimes what we found here at Nonprofit HR is that most practitioners or leaders think The only time an organization should really consider conducting an assessment is when there's an issue, when there's a changing of the guard, either within the HR function, or there's a change at the top of the organization, or there's a potential threat or concern with liability. And while all of these are valid considerations, there are several other reasons for conducting an assessment. The first one that I want to talk about just for a moment is leadership or organizational or structural changes. Anytime your organization is about to face or has gone through a key leadership or organizational change, that is a great time for either someone in-house on the HR team or for the organization to consider working with someone outside of their organization to conduct an HR assessment. This is a good time to have a fresh set of eyes, to step back and take a look at how has the organization performed from an HR standpoint, what's been effective, what are areas of opportunity, what needs to be changed. And an HR assessment can help to provide that type of insight, to include creating a framework or a roadmap in which a new leader coming into the organization can quickly leverage to assimilate into their role or into the organization and prioritize their first several months or year in the role, understanding what are some of the key deliverables or things that need to change. The second area that influences or necessitates the need for an HR assessment is really external pressures. It's no doubt the economy, new technologies such as AI, increased competition, the softening of the market, which we've seen over the last couple of years, all have impacts on the profitability of, not the profitability, but all have impacts on really our organization's abilities to further its missions and its reach. And if you're experiencing or facing some of these external pressures, then now is a great time to really take a look at your HR programs and services to determine how are they affecting the bottom line, in the sense that do our HR functional programs and strategies help the organization further its mission, further its reach? Are they cost effective or are they cost prohibitive? And from there, you can take, measures and steps to address. The third area is if your organization is considering a merger and acquisition. I'm not sure how many on the phone or how many on the webinar, have experienced or been through a merger or acquisition, but those two things can be very complex and challenging. So an HR assessment is a vehicle, again, that can be used to help to determine relative to the new organization, what are the practices? What are the approaches that we want to carry forward into the new organization? Where are areas that we want to blend practices or procedures or programs or strategies? And again, an assessment can be useful in helping to foundationally stand up the new organization as well. The fourth area is organizational alignment. And this one is key. And we've talked about the need to have organizational alignment. And when you look at this graph here, HR is really at the bottom, and I didn't place HR at the bottom to be condescending or to have HR position as the last, the least, and the left out. I placed HR specifically there because HR is the function within the organization that really undergirds and upholds the organization's ability to achieve its priorities, objectives, its mission, and its vision. And so this graphic is displaying really the importance of HR foundationally and functionally with regards to ensuring alignment, all with the goal of helping the organization be able to further its mission and its reach. The fifth area is with regards to effectiveness and efficiency. This is another critical area for organizational success. And again, an HR assessment provides insight relative to how effective are our programs. Are our HR interfaces user-friendly? Do our HR processes create more work for organizational leaders? Is critical information easily accessible by our employees? All of these are things your HR assessment can help to identify and also recommend change or improvement. We've spoken earlier in the presentation about the regulatory climate and just the constant evolvement of employment law and changes. And again, an HR assessment is another tool which can be used to help flag potential concerns and also provide insight relative to actionable things the organization can do to mitigate its liability. The final area that really necessitates the need for conducting an assessment is just due to growth and shifting priorities. Growth is always an exciting opportunity for an organization, but with growth comes challenges such as, does our org structure support the anticipated growth? Do we have the right processes in place to engage talent, for example, throughout the talent acquisition process? In terms of career pathing and career development, do we have identified processes or strategies in place to promote and develop staff? Or do we have the requisite skills in-house to meet the needs of an organization on a moving forward basis? These are all factors in which an HR assessment, again, can shed light on to include providing recommendations and prioritizations. So at this juncture, I'm going to take a pause and I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Swana Watson, who will kick off her discussion with an introduction, really talking through the mechanics of what actually happens when we conduct an HR assessment. So Swana, take it away.
Thank you so much, Shelby, for walking us through the reasons why and when a human resources assessment should be conducted. In this next part of our presentation, I'll provide an introduction to an HR assessment. And this is really nonprofit HR's approach to an HR assessment. And what we do is we really involve a thorough examination and appraisal of your human resources services, provided to your organization. And as part of nonprofit HR's assessment process, and as we get started, we really take a look at the 7 areas mentioned above in this presentation here. And then we conduct a comprehensive analysis of both the strategic and operational aspects of current workplace policies, programs, practices as they relate to all 7 of these areas. So first, I'll talk about our approach to assessment of compliance. And as Shelby mentioned, there are ever-changing regulatory compliance laws, and it's really important and crucial that HR is on top of all of these changes. An HR assessment can really help to identify any compliance gaps and mitigate potential risk in order to protect the organization from legal issues. So ensuring that your HR practices and policies are in full compliance with local, we look at state and federal regulations, and then also taking a look at, labor regulations, non-discrimination laws, wage and hour requirements. All of this is imperative as part of our HR assessment, and really diving into, how your organization conducts these practices and are, following these policies and procedures. An HR assessment also evaluates really the effectiveness of your HR policies. We take a look at the employee handbook, and then we also really look at your procedures that really help to mitigate risk related to employee grievances, how employees are what's the escalation for when an employee has a grievance, how is that process conducted. We look at misconduct and how those misconduct is addressed within the organization, and other potential legal issues. So if identified and not addressed, this is really critical, right? Because this could mean a potential risk to your organization. And then it can also be very costly for your organization as well when trying to address these, situations that may come as a result of, not being in compliance. So the laws are constantly changing, as I mentioned, and it's essential that HR is really at the center of making sure that they're aware of what those changes are and really staying on top of those changes. Next, I'll talk about total rewards and compensation. And so really what we're looking at is, the effectiveness of your total rewards and compensation strategy, as it really directly impacts employee motivation, it impacts retention, it impacts overall job satisfaction. And so where an HR assessment comes in, it really helps to evaluate the competitiveness of your compensation packages, and really understanding what is your organization's approach to total rewards and compensation. So what we're looking at is what enables your organization to really attract and retain top talent. And we're also taking a look at your overall benefits, right? Your pay time off structure and processes. We're looking at your employee rewards and recognition programs and how effective or ineffective they may be, right? And how these programs are also valued by your employees. And then HR assessment can also pinpoint areas for improvement in your talent acquisition and management processes, right? And so really helping us to identify and, really nurture high potential employees. So attracting, hiring, retaining, we take a look at your recruitment workflows, your recruitment practices. And then we also really try to understand, is the process confusing? We try to understand in terms of your managers, are they following the process consistently, right? Does the process lend its way to biases, as Shelby mentioned earlier in the presentation? So we look at coaching, we look at mentorship, we look at those programs to see, how effective those programs are in supporting employee growth. So attracting the right talent is really the first step, but the HR assessment also takes a look at the organization's retention strategies and really helps us identify opportunities for improvement here. And then continuous learning and development. These are really key components of your employee engagement and growth programs and practices. So an HR assessment can reveal opportunities to enhance, your performance development programs, or as Shelby mentioned, performance enablement programs, and really ensure that they are aligned with your business goals and supporting continuous skill development, making sure that they're identifying training opportunities. Employees are, seeking out what are training opportunities that will help me in my growth, in my career development, and really making sure that you're developing your people capabilities. Your organizational culture, this is a big one, right? Your organizational culture and employee engagement levels also have a direct impact on productivity and, employee motivation, retention, all of these things. And so what an HR assessment does, it really can help gauge the current state of your culture. It helps you identify strategies to really help to improve and boost employee engagement, employee morale, employee satisfaction, especially if you have a value-based culture. So the workplace culture is also part of your employer brand. Your employees represent your organization, and this is how, they refer others to come to the organization, right? And so according to a Gallup study that we took a look at, the best workplace is the one that cares for its employees and positions employees, essentially employee engagement as a catalyst for improving important business outcomes. So it's super important that as part of the assessment, we take a look at your overall employee engagement practices and really have an understanding of your organization's culture to provide the best recommendations to support in this area. We also review your organization's policies and procedures. I can't stress enough how important consistency and fairness in HR policies and procedures are critical. So an assessment can uncover any inconsistencies, any gaps in your policies. It allows you to make necessary adjustments to ensure equity and compliance overall. And last but certainly not least, we do take a look at your HR systems, your processes and analytics. Efficient HR systems and processes are essential for really streamlining your HR operations. And so where an HR assessment comes into play is it can help us identify areas where technology can be better leveraged, and data analytics can really help to optimize your HR functions, really to enhance your decision making and drive efficiency. So overall, an HR assessment, really reviews the structure and capabilities of your HR department, including all of your workflows, your roles and responsibilities. We take a look at HR effectiveness, right, while identifying areas where HR could have or maybe needs more impact and can be more impactful. And next slide, please. So conducting an HR, we talked about introduction to all that is involved in the HR assessment. And so now I'll talk a little bit about really conducting the HR assessment and really our approach at Nonprofit HR. Other organizations may approach an assessment differently, but really focusing on, how we approach an assessment here at Nonprofit HR. And so first things first, I like to use the analogy of peeling back the onion. I do admit we do a bit of digging, we do a bit of snooping around. We ask a lot of questions as part of our assessment process, and we dive into how much time even each HR role, spends working on each of these 7 areas that we mentioned, right? Really trying to have a holistic understanding of view and view of what HR does for the organizations. And sometimes, these conversations, they do feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And really, they are all a necessary part of this process. We're not doing this just to be nosy, right? But we're looking at, where are the gaps in the process? Where are the gaps in the workflows? How can we really position HR to be really effective? How can we empower your HR leaders and HR team members? We're taking a look at capacity. We'll talk a little bit about, HR being burnt out. Where can there be areas for improvement? Where can, HR use technology and leverage technology to really be a resource, right? Technology, I know this is in the news. We're hearing a lot about technology and AI, but, rather than looking at it as negatively, how do we really approach technology to leverage it to make sure that we are supporting our HR function? And so we really want to better position the HR team to function efficiently, to function effectively, all while deploying HR strategies and supporting the organization's goal. So as also part of Nonprofit HR's approach, we take a forward-looking view of what will be important for the organization regarding their HR. We consider the organization's desire to progress and have an aligned HR strategy. And in this context, we assess the current state of HR at the organization. And we also provide a recommendation, a roadmap on how your organization really should consider prioritizing, these recommendations and identifying the strategic focus and framework that the organization really needs to move forward. And next slide. Thank you. So we wanted to walk you through Nonprofit HR's process as we conduct an HR assessment. The first part of our conversation is the project kickoff. This is where we listen and confirm. We have, conversations with the project team. We identify what the scope of the work is. So essentially, what brought you to Nonprofit HR if you are using or whatever firm that you're using if you are going with an external third party. We want to understand what are the pain points, right? What are you hoping to identify as part of this process? Of course, as part of this process, we may also identify other areas that may be more critical, right, that maybe the organization hadn't thought of, and provide those recommendations as well. But, what we're doing is we're seeking to understand and confirm essentially, what your needs are as it relates to the HR assessment. And then we ask, like I said, a lot of questions, and we ask for a lot of documentation. I know in our previous slides, we talked about the 7 areas that we focus on as part of this process. And so we provide a list of documents, really just, organized under each of those 7 areas as it relates to those areas so that we can then take the next steps, which is delving into our discovery phase. So this is where we really assess all of the documents that are provided as part of the initial request for documentation. So in some cases, some of those documents may not be available, and that's okay as well, right? And as part of our discovery, what we're doing is we're exploring all of the documents that are present, that you don't have, that are, and based on that, that might be part of our findings as well, and we provide recommendations for that. Also, as part of our discovery, we solicit stakeholder feedback. It's important that we hear from employees, from the leadership team, from managers, from the HR individual roles itself, right? So we do take the time to interview all HR roles, and then even non-HR roles. Some organizations, may have non-HR roles that are responsible essentially for HR functions. And so we explore all of that as part of this process. We seek to hear the employee voice. And then, we use all of this information as part of our assessment and next steps of our process. And so once we've collected all of this data, we then take the time to analyze it. This is where we're looking, pulling from best practices, looking at all of the areas that we talked about. We identify, well, there might be gaps in these areas, or this we foresee being a challenge, right? And then based on that, we provide recommendations. We also take a look at what HR does well, right? I think, the importance of that I want to share here, that all for all to understand, is we want to take a look at what HR does well as well, right? We're not always focusing on things that need to change or improve, right? Yes, those are important, but we also seek to identify what does HR need to start, stop, or continue. What's HR doing well as part of this as well? So it's just as important to fully understand the full picture, so that we want to make sure that we're recognizing what is done well for the organization as well. And then we report our findings, right? We provide a roadmap with priorities based on our best practice recommendations, and really just what we think would set the HR department up for success, right? And then we turn it over to our clients, right? It is super important that our clients are actively involved in driving transformation and change, right? This is part of the implementation phase of our project as it relates to the HR assessment. We want our clients to make sure that they're really taking the recommendations and driving that change within their organization. And equally as important is the monitoring and evaluating, right? When you're implementing these programs, it's super important that you're setting a benchmark, within this time frame. What are we hoping to achieve, as part of, these recommendations, or putting these either new processes or workflows into place? What are we hoping to achieve? And then making sure those benchmarks are reached. If they're not being reached, how do we change? How do we, change direction, or whatever is needed to make sure that results are there, and that the client is monitoring and evaluating the results of the assessment. Next slide. So this brings us to the main question of our day, right? And this presentation, and what are the 3 things that an HR assessment reveals? First, it should reveal the strategic and operational capacity and capability of your HR, right? What is the state of the union? Meaning, as it relates to HR, what is the current state? What's HR doing now versus where an organization desires HR to be, right? And so it reveals whether your HR is more transactional than strategic. HR of the past focused more on transaction, right? HR 20 years ago is not the same as HR today, right? Current HR really lends itself to HR playing more of a strategic role within the organization. And then that's number 1. Number 2, are your HR programs efficient and effective? That's what an HR assessment should reveal, right? You should have an answer of, does HR strategy contribute to the organization furthering its mission, its impact, its reach, or is HR a drain on the organization? How does HR contribute to future readiness, right? If the pandemic has taught us anything, is that HR has to be ready, right? Or the organization has to be ready. And so how do we set HR in a place where they can make sure that the organization understands who we are, how we operate, how we grow. And this is really your organization's true test of resilience and agility. During this process, we ask about potential internal, external factors that might impact your organization, and how do you ensure that the organization is prepared to handle anything that comes its way. It reveals the HR technology impact. Technology, like I said, is crucial. Is your organization having the conversation about AI and its impact and potential impact to your organization, right? How can this be leveraged by looking at HR data and analytics, including statistics, to really assess the effectiveness and efficiency of programs and services? How can AI be leveraged in HR to really support the day-to-day things that are things that are repetitive? How can we leverage that to really make sure HR is being efficient and effective? And then finally, the organization alignment. Does HR have a seat at the table? And what does that mean, right? It means, is HR strategically involved? HR should really be seen as strategic partners rather than just administrative or compliance-focused personnel, right? They're actively contributing, as Shelby mentioned, to shaping the organization's overall business strategy and direction. And then also is HR, utilizing data-driven insights and metrics, right? This is important for decision-making processes to help leaders and help inform decision-making at the leadership level. Does HR have an advisory role, right? Is HR advocating for employees and, doing all of this while aligning to the overall business objectives? Next slide. So we took a look at some research and really focusing on the trends in addition to what Shelby mentioned in terms of nonprofit HR's insights, that we've done this year. But we did take a look at some additional statistics as it related to trends in HR for 2023. And a couple of the things that we looked at was, employee experience, remote work, which is, a big topic of conversation for a lot of employees, and then the future of work, all of these trends. And then what we've learned as it pertains to employee experience, we've learned that 47% of HR leaders report that, employee experience is a priority for their organization for 2023. And so what does that all involve? That involves, really making clear career paths, communicating benefit options for employees, and really providing new opportunities for existing employees. All of this can go a long way in really helping workers feel more satisfied at your organization. And not, to be surprised, but 42% of HR teams are struggling with burnout, right? It's super important that the organization, like we talked about technology and really utilizing, processes to really help make HR more efficient, make HR practices, workflows more efficient so that HR can really focus on the strategic aspect of the work that they do, right? And so super important that, we mentioned HR is burnt out, right? And so it's super important that we really, really utilize all of the, technology and resources that we can support, in really helping HR move the needle forward. And then remote workers, we understand that 15 to 70% of HR leaders struggle to integrate remote workers into their team and into their company culture, right? These leaders admitted that they're not prepared at all for fully virtual recruitment and onboarding, right? They're struggling essentially with making sure that employees who are working remotely are, feel part of, employee engagement is high. How do we retain our talent when we no longer have that in-person sort of collaboration? How do we keep employees engaged? Not surprising that leaders did find this to be an area where they're struggling with, right? And then finally, the future of work trends. 36% of HR professionals said that they don't have adequate technology. All of these pieces I've mentioned, right? All of these, it's critical that we also mention that an HR assessment can really help your organization, develop a future strategy in addressing these concerns. The trends of today may not be the same as 2024, but really positioning HR to a place where they can really lead the organization and support the organization in addressing these challenges, as they do come forward. Any additional thoughts? I'd like to invite Shelby before she goes into the next slide. Any additional insights or thoughts before I turn it back over to you?
No, Swana, I think you've done a great job. The data matters. And, what we're seeing, that really stuck out with me regarding this particular graphic is that the fact that 43% of HR leaders report that they don't have a future work strategy. And kind of to your earlier point, if the pandemic taught us anything, it's the criticality of having a future work strategy, because AI is going to continue to be disruptive. The war against, in-person versus remote work is going to continue to wage. And an HR assessment is a viable tool to be able to not only provide an organization with insight relative to areas of opportunity, but viable solutions the organization can look to implement that are based off of trends in the industry or trends within the nonprofit sector, industry best practices, and our collective and combined knowledge and expertise as a team of S&A professionals as well. So,
Great.
okay, next slide, Atokatha. And thank you again, Swana. So Swana, you did a great job of really introducing our participants to an HR assessment, the mechanics of it, what does the process look like, and then what are the reveals of the assessment. So relative to the next steps, I thought I'd put this slide here, and it's for kicks and grins and giggles, if you will. So what do you do with the results of the HR assessment? Well, you've got several options. You could opt to put it on the shelf, or you could opt to hand it over to another staffer or the less junior person on the team, or you could opt to do nothing. And so as we were thinking about this presentation today, certainly we are hoping that our participants would, elect to not, govern or utilize any of these approaches here, but we actually, want to invite you to take, action with regards to the results. And I'm going to talk you through just an approach or a model that I found to be useful. But before I do that, I did find a quote that simply states, knowing is not enough, you must take action. So I want to say, now that you know what an HR assessment is, when an organization should conduct an assessment, and the 3 things the assessment can reveal, we really now want to pivot our discussion and talk about, how do you utilize this information? When nonprofit HR puts together or conducts an HR assessment, as Swana highlighted, we go through a comprehensive process of discovery, analysis, evaluating, soliciting stakeholder feedback, and then we, compile and gather data, and then, we put all of those findings into a report. And typically our reports can average easily anywhere from 30 to 40 or more pages. And that's a lot of information to have to decipher. The great news is that as part of the assessment process, when we present a report to our clients, we spend ample time walking our clients through what those results are. And then we also provide an outline of some unique but robust recommendations and prioritizations that can be used to implement or drive change. So in terms of what do you do with the results of the assessment, again, let's talk about an approach that I've found to be effective. Okay, next slide, Atokatha. So utilizing the information in the HR assessment effectively really involves what I found to be several key steps to drive what I consider to be positive change within the organization and improvement. So this is, again, there are many different models, many different approaches, but this is one that I found to be helpful. So number one, I always encourage that you start out by really reviewing, prioritizing, and action planning. So what does that mean? Coordinate time to really sit down, to understand the report, the findings, the recommendations, and really the identified opportunities. And I also encourage that you read through it more than one time, because I promise you, as you go through the report of the assessment, you'll walk away with different nuggets and different perspectives each iteration. I think it's important as you're reading through and assessing the report at the onset, start to think about what is the low-hanging fruit. What are the quick wins HR can implement versus, what are the things that it will take the organization or our function time to really build and put a plan together and implement. This step should also set the stage for HR to begin prioritizing, what are the critical areas from this assessment that are going to require our immediate attention, and then begin prioritizing those based on the impact to the organization's goals, employee satisfaction, and or compliance requirements. Once you've kind of reached a place of agreement around the priorities, then HR can begin to work towards developing an action plan. And this should include a detailed action plan for addressing the identified issues and opportunities. I think something else that the HR assessment reveals that's often overlooked is that once you have the assessment report and results, you can assign specific individuals Or if you are a team of one, you can again bucket out, where you'd like to focus your efforts on. If you are fortunate to have a team, again, one of the hidden benefits of the assessment report is that it potentially creates opportunities to develop the skill set of your HR team. Team members can be assigned specific areas or specific projects based on the recommendation, which again provides the opportunity for shared learning and all of that. The second step in terms of how do you utilize the HR assessment results really hinges on communication and transparency. Once HR has had an opportunity or business leader has had the chance to really sit down and analyze the information, I think the second step is really taking time to communicate the findings and the action plan to all of your relevant stakeholders. Again, that includes your HR team. If you're a team of one, you've already got the knowledge, but make sure that your managers, your employees, where applicable, know about the results and know, what you're planning to do. I think transparency about the results and the organization's commitment to improvement is key to the success of the organization moving forward. Also, as you endeavor to really review the assessment results, I think it's important to take time to obtain stakeholder feedback. What were your key stakeholders' observations? Were they aligned with the recommendations? Do they agree? Did they have other thoughts or other concerns? Again, it's important to, continue to find out, what are their impressions about the results, and then again, leverage their feedback to help with identifying, how you want to prioritize and move forward regarding the results. I think it's also important to understand too, and Swana tapped on this a little bit, is that the results of the assessment are not meant to be an individual indictment against, the person in HR or, the HR function as a whole. The results, although sometimes they might be tough to hear, especially if there are a number of areas of concerns and opportunities, but they're meant to really enlighten and to empower and to really provide a robust roadmap and a framework for a path forward. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, the assessment can help to identify skill gaps or deficiencies, again, which can aid in training, development planning, etc. The third area is around the need to monitor and measure results. Now that you've got the assessment, you've went through it, you've met with your stakeholders, you've gotten their reaction and their observations and feedback on your priorities, it's now time to really, as I put the pedal to the metal, if you will, and begin to monitor and measure your results. There's a quote that I found which states, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So again, the third step would be to begin to really start to work to think about, how do we outline our action plan? Who will we assign to be owners to certain parts of the action plans? What is the timeline? How do we track progress? And then how do we ensure that we have regular reviews? I think that's critical. You have to plan to have those regular reviews to see how far you've come and to also, see, the progress that you've made. It's also important to continue to solicit feedback from your key stakeholders as well as leverage HR analytics to monitor and measure your results achieved. The fourth step is really around documentation. Of course, we all know in HR, the old adage, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So where your HR assessment, the same also applies. Take time to document the actions that you've taken. Take time to document what is the plan of action. And then again, go back and spend time to review that and also make certain that your stakeholders are aware of, the progress that you've made. Step 5 is, again, conduct routine reviews and evaluate continuous improvement. As we mentioned, there's going to be a barrage of continuing external pressures, whether it's the economy, whether it's evolving and changing employment laws and the regulatory landscape. And all of those things, to include the war on talent, all of those things really necessitate that all of us that have a stake in the game where HR is concerned operate from a standard of continuous improvement. We cannot remain stagnant. We cannot stand still. We've always got to be thinking about how do we continue to adapt, How do we continue to be agile? How do we continue to improve our programs, our service offerings? And so for that reason, you can leverage this information as a foundational benchmark of sorts to say, hey, our organization started here in 2023, a year out, we're here, 2 years out, we're here. So again, utilize this information to drive and to inspire continuous improvement where the HR and function is concerned. Number 6, and I've tapped on this lightly, it's important to maintain legal and ethical compliance. These results can be used to highlight, if there are areas where the organization really needs to put some stopgap measures in place to mitigate liability, or if there are areas where the organization needs to ensure greater alignment. Most organizations now that have employees who are remote and are scattered across the country are now subject to not only federal employment law, but also state law. And so it's important to understand, is your organization compliant with the plethora of laws that come in as a result of each state having different laws, as well as jurisdictional and regional laws. Also, I think it's important to also take into consideration as well, relative to the ethics standpoint, again, and I mentioned this early in the presentation, but are your programs and services set up with a DEI lens? Do they take into consideration the complexities and the nuances of the differing dimensions of diversity? And again, leveraging this report can certainly help you to determine and gauge that. And so this pretty much will end our presentation relative to the HR assessment reveals. Swan and I would now like to take an opportunity to open the floor and allow our audience members to pose questions. We're also going to take a moment to invite our Managing Director, Dr. Tracy Weeks, who's Managing Director for the Strategy and Advisory Team, to join us as we answer questions from our program participants this afternoon.
Thank you, Shelby and Suwana, one, for laying out so eloquently how we help our clients in doing HR assessments and why it's a foundational process for us. And one of the things I personally love about our assessments, or even assessing as an HR person, is that we really help lay a foundation for the next 2 to 5 years when it comes to talent management, right? With HR assessments, they're not fun things, but they are foundational things that can help us build foundations in an organization that our employees are looking for, build in some stabilization, and help us stay focused on the missions of the organization. And how does HR and talent management align to that? Great job, ladies.
Thank you. So
hi, everyone, and welcome, Tracy. welcome, Dr. Weeks. The questions are pouring in, so we can get started. What is the best time period for an organization to undergo an HR assessment? And what about the limit in size for an organization? Do you have any recommendations based on those 2 things?
Okay, I'll take that question. And thank you, audience member, for that question. In terms of the time, if we had to say, is January better than July, or is July better than December? The answer is it depends on really the priorities of your organization. We have clients that reach out to us all throughout the year, saying, hey, we'd like to engage nonprofit HR to support us with an HR assessment. We're seeing a lot of activity now that it's 4th quarter as organizations are looking to prepare for 2024. And so many organizations are reaching out saying, hey, we'd like to get an HR assessment and leverage that information to set our agenda for 2024. In terms of size, that is also a great question. We work with organizations that have no HR present. We work with organizations that have a team of 1. And we also work with organizations that may have a team of 3 to 5 or more individuals. In terms of size of the organization, some of the organizations we are working with are small in numbers, or maybe 4 people total. There could be upwards of 50 to 100. So size really doesn't limit our ability to come in and conduct a thorough assessment and provide that insight and guidance on, again, areas of strength, areas of opportunity, or areas that need improvement relative to the 7 core functional areas of HR. Swana or Dr. Tracy, would you like to add anything else?
I would add, instead of focusing on size, what you want to focus on is function. Is your HR department functioning in a way that supports your mission and supports your people? And if the answer to that is no, then that means an HR assessment could be helpful. So that could be at 1 or it could be 201. It wouldn't matter as long as it's functioning. That's what we're reaching for.
Another question focuses on your background and experience in helping HR and leadership communicate anticipated changes or alleviate anxieties due to and undergoing an HR assessment.
Yeah. Do you want me to take that one?
I can take that one, Dr. Tracy. I'll take a stab at it, and if you want to jump in and add in it. One thing that Swana mentioned that was critical with regards to the HR assessment process is just really around the data gathering, the information gathering, and the kickoff process that we facilitate. We recognize that an HR assessment can seem overwhelming, can be overwhelming. And for those who are in the HR role, they may feel nervous about what the results will, show. So what we tend to do with our approach is that we get with all stakeholders on a call, we meet, we establish a project plan, we understand who our points of contact are, we understand, and align on deliverable dates. We understand and align on how are we going to speak with stakeholders about this process. And from there, we partner with the organization to put forth broad communications, announcing the partnership to the organization, announcing nonprofit HR, the expertise, the knowledge that we bring, the practice areas and all of that, and how we are going to leverage all of that to really help position the organization for success relative to the findings of the HR assessment. So Dr. Tracy or Swana, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add there.
And the only thing I wanted to add to that, Shelby, is that, we really seek to partner with, right, your HR department. We're having those conversations, right? I think there's the feeling that we're coming in there to, when we're having those conversations, as it's a negative connotation, but that's not really the case, right? And as we start to delve into these HR assessments, HR teams that we're working with understand that we're there to really help them identify opportunities, and so I think focusing on that is really critical and really making sure that that message and that communication comes across. The reason why we're there working in collaboration and conjunction with the HR department and really providing that support in that manner. And I don't know if Dr. Tracy wants to add anything additional.
Yeah, I think you both summed it up. The underlying concern is that there will be anxiousness and anxiety about any outside organization coming in and measuring something, right, or assessing something. So part of the process is just making sure that we're all on board for that, and that people, talent in the organization understand that they are a major part of it. Part of our process is actually talking to them one-on-one in focus groups and even surveying to figure out what their barriers are for talent management. What are the things they like? What are the things they don't like? So we're working with them in partnership to get to these results, and they can see their voice in the results. So there we can kind of gain some buy-in in the process.
Right.
And if I could add one more thing, it's been my experience that as we partner with our clients, and thanks Swana and Dr. Tracy for raising that up, at the end of our engagement, it's almost like we're friends, we're part of the team because we've worked very closely with our clients for, a 90-day time frame, and we've gotten to know, the nuances, the ins and outs of the team. And again, we make it a point to stay connected and to provide that continuous feedback and communication relative to where we're at with the project or the process. And oftentimes when it's over, it's, it's this feeling of, we've had so much fun engaging, and we've had so much fun getting to know each other over the last, couple of months. And it's sort of hard to really say goodbye, or this is the end, if you will.
All right, thanks so much. Here's the next question. How has AI changed or enhanced the assessment process?
That's a great question.
Yeah. Just like AI is changing everything, right? But we embrace it. That's a good thing. We've had some fun over the last couple of months, seeing how we can infuse AI into our systems and our process of even gathering and coding information to make sure that the recommendations we are making and the results we are presenting are not only valid, but reliable and credible, and double checking that with all the research. And so AI helps us do that. It also helps us to be able to get through this process faster than not, right? Because when you engage us, you want your results, you need them. That's why you're calling us. And so it's not going to take us 6 or 8 months to go through, because we're also making sure that we're double checking and mitigating any bias, right? When we're interpreting results, AI is helping us make sure we mitigate that bias. And I think there's so much more to come on how we will continue to use AI. As an addition in 2024, one of the things that we'll start doing with our HR assessments that we're so excited about is actually start a part of the assessment that talks about AI capabilities from a talent management perspective when it comes to HR assessment. So stay tuned. We are keeping up with the times and riding the wave, and just excited to try.
Thanks so much. Here's the next question. Do you make recommendations regarding structure of HR services in organizations?
Yeah, I can start there, and Dr. Tracy and Shelby, definitely jump in. But yeah, that could be a finding, right? I mean, it really depends on the assessment that we're doing, and when we're evaluating, we're really looking to see, the effectiveness of the structure that you all have, that the organization has in place, right? And so, we're not coming in there to essentially say, starting off the bat, this is how HR should be structured. We really need to understand your organization's practices, your procedures, workflows, to then make the best recommendation. And that might be, that maybe there needs to be an adjustment to the structure. That means that, maybe it's bringing in another HR role, or, really maybe infusing a couple of roles together, or whatever the case may be. Really, like I said, is going to depend on the assessment and the findings that, we have as part of the assessment to really make that determination.
Yeah, and we've got several questions on the average time frame or amount of time needed to complete an HR assessment.
Yeah. I'll take that, because they're very simple answers. Typically, and you heard Shelby say 90 days, typically our process is about 8 to 12 weeks. However, our product that we also offer are mini assessments, and those can take between 4 to 6 weeks. In a mini assessment, we'll help you drill down to the top 2 issues, those things that are really plaguing your organization that we need to solve quickly. In the longer process, we help you think through those 7 areas totally, and focus on recommendations and solutions for those 7 solutions within the next year or so. So 2 different processes, but around 8 to 12 weeks and 4 to 6 weeks if you want a shortened time frame.
Here's another question. In your assessments, do you engage with those outside of HR, payroll, finance staff? If so, what does that look like?
Great question, and I'll kick that one off, and certainly again, Swana and Dr. Tracy jump in. So the short answer to that question is absolutely. A part of our project kickoff, we begin some of those conversations around who are the key stakeholders, who are the key team leaders or players or members of the C-suite executive team, that we need to have as part of this process. And then we talk about, how do we want to engage those leaders? Do we want to engage them via, a focus group, or do we want to engage them via individual stakeholder conversations? So absolutely, anyone that the client feels I cannot talk, but anyone the client feels that it's necessary and critical for us to have a conversation with, to garner insight from regarding the assessment, we like to carve out time to do that, because also one of the things that we found is when we take into consideration stakeholder feedback, when it comes time for HR to make recommendations, the adoption, the buy-in, and the engagement is much easier when we've gotten that, 360 feedback from various stakeholders, to include finance, payroll, again, CEOs, C-suite leaders. It just depends, on the client.
Yeah. Anyone who will work closely with your HR function, which may be everyone in the organization. So in those opportunities where we get to expand who we talk to, we have surveyed organizations specifically on their interactions with the HR function. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What would you like to see? What have you had experience in other organizations that you'd like this organization to do? So we drill down to really get their thoughts on how they're interacting with the HR function. So whoever has a close relationship or needs something from HR, which is usually everyone, we will talk to everyone.
Right.
Here's the next question. What are some common mistakes you see HR pros make when implementing assessment-related changes? And what advice would you give to those completing these for the first time?
That's a great question. What do we say?
Well, I think some things that I have unfortunately seen, and that's why I was intentional in putting my slide in there. What do you do with the assessment results? Do nothing, hand it off to another staffer, put it on the shelf. Unfortunately, we've seen some clients who really don't take action. They kind of place it on the shelf and, come back and revisit it. By that time, you've lost momentum. So it's important, once you have the results, we've spent time walking through the results, you've got the ear and the buy-in and engagement of your stakeholders and your leaders in the C-suite, is that you begin to put an action plan in place to keep, that momentum going, and then continue to provide regular feedback around, progress to date, if there's any additional new bottlenecks that have surfaced, et cetera. So it's really critical to take action.
Yeah, I'd second that, Shelby. It's super important that, when you do receive your HR results, you start to have that conversation. And just as Shelby said, you've got to start putting that action into place. Otherwise, it's going to be, an assessment process where you've dedicated so much time and resources to doing and nothing happens, right? So we're having these conversations because the goal is to really help to make impact. And so having those conversations are critical. And that is definitely, one mistake, HR professionals may make where they're not moving forward and taking action. So completely agree with that, Shelby.
The only other thing I would add is not using the prioritized recommendations. I feel like it's a secret part in our assessment that will really help you focus on what's most important and what's on fire, and help you slow down and prioritize what you can wait to do later. So the prioritized recommendations that we give you at the end of the report really help validate what you think you've heard or what you think you've known, and what needs to really be addressed from a risk and compliance, from a culture perspective. And it helps you put those things on the back burner that you can wait to do, so that you don't have to do everything at the same time.
So we have somewhat of a mixed question. It looks like the person is trying to combat internal burnout. That's what they're seeking to address, while also recognizing that they need to focus on conducting an HR assessment. Any insight on how organizations can balance the two?
Meaning trying to build the plane as you're flying it? Maybe that's the question.
That is absolutely correct.
maybe that's the question. I can let Suwana and Shelby go. I'm happy to.
I think it's really understanding what the priorities are, right? Understanding that you can't do everything, right? And that's why we have the prioritized list, right? So that or roadmap or plan, right? It's really focusing on addressing and understanding what are the priorities for our organization, and let's go ahead and put that into action, making sure that we focus on small chunks. When you try to do everything all at once and make plans for everything all at once, it really doesn't, help with the burnout, right? I think there's definitely more burnout. So really focusing on, small priorities, addressing those, tackling those, moving on to the next, and being really intentional about creating a plan that you can follow to really combat, any burnout.
Okay. And I'm also, thank you for that, Swan. I'm also thinking about a client that I had worked with. They were a health system, and they had a one-person HR function, one person doing the HR function, if you will. And as part of the assessment, that was our recommendation, in terms of areas of risk. You're at risk if the structure doesn't change in the organization, i.e., consider bringing on a director of talent acquisition, or consider bringing on a manager of talent acquisition, or consider bringing on, additional admin support. That was part of our recommendation. Your HR director is burnt out and you're at risk of losing this person and losing, a ton of institutional knowledge. So, unfortunately, the challenge of burnout is real, but, we are capable of, building a recommendation to help address that within the assessment, and to also help the client understand, how to prioritize that.
Yeah, our assessments are used quite often as support for the things that we've probably been saying for a while. We understand how all that goes, right? But we'll help you create it in a way that you can make the case if you feel like you need support or you need something different or there should be a different structure. And we'll also give you options for that, because you may need 20 people in HR, but going from 1 to 20 is probably not plausible. How can we put together a structure that can support you now and put together a structure for you that can help support you as you grow?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got time for one more quick question. And this one is similar in terms of what you would recommend for an organization that is going through major culture shifts, and whether or not this would be the appropriate time for an HR assessment.
I think maybe. I think the answer to that is gray, right? And it's one of the discussions that we'll have. If your organization is in upheaval and people have gotten change fatigue, survey fatigue, those things happen all the time, right? There may be a better time to do it. But if your organization is in an upheaval because of the lack of strategy or the mismanagement of the talent management function, then getting an answer that can help you stabilize is helpful. You want to get that done soon. So it kind of depends. It could be the wrong time based on what you've done before and what's coming after, but it could be the right time to kind of help steady the water. So it depends.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, Dr. Tracy, is that, depending on the, conversations, because we would have to spend time really understanding, the state of the union, it might necessitate, and I can't talk this afternoon, it might necessitate, the need for another solution, before actually, looking to go into an HR assessment.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have today for our Q&A for this webinar. And there are many more webinars to come in 2023. So be sure to check out our events calendar at nonprofithr.com/events. Also, be sure to complete the feedback survey that will pop up once the webcast is ended. Your comments do help us with our planning and can inform our topics that we cover as well. If you'd like more information about the services Nonprofit HR offers, please email us at solutions@nonprofithr.com or visit us online at nonprofithr.com. Now I can turn it back over to our presenters to offer a 30-second wrap-up or point of wisdom that you'd like to leave behind for our attendees.
I'll go, Atokatha. I just want to reinforce something that I shared. Knowing is half the battle. You must take action.
Again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about the services we offer at Nonprofit HR, please visit us online at nonprofithr.com or email us at solutions@nonprofithr.com. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your afternoon.